God Valley is already proving itself to be the hub of One Piece lore. This Elbaf flashback is a treasure trove containing all the answers to One Piece's recent history. Legendary beginnings, important character relationships, backstories we didn't expect. And I think that may also mean that we're about to see how Sword started. As the much anticipated God Valley incident unfolds chapter by chapter, we've been seeing new unexpected answers to questions we've been asking for years. Who exactly was Rox? What were all those big names doing converged on just one island? What were the prices of God Valley? And as we see more of Rox Dieselbeck, or sorry, should I say Davy Dieselbeck, a feeling common amongst fans is that Rox doesn't seem like such a bad guy, causing us to question why did he have to be taken down? Why would Roger and Garp, two supposed heroes of their respective factions, choose to fight Rox and not the Celestial Dragons or the Holy Knights, who were arguably doing the most wrong at God Valley? In fact, I have actually already shared my thoughts as to why I think Rox will have to be taken down. A little case of Domi Reversi Rox, and you can watch the full discussion afterwards if you'd like. But a big piece of this puzzle is Garp's somewhat questionable actions at God Valley. His actions in prioritizing taking down the pirates rather than the Celestial Dragons. I know a lot of people have been quite disappointed in Garp's position and his actions. Rather than being appalled at the sight of the atrocities being committed by the Celestial Dragons, and instead of being compelled to defy his marine duty like his son Dragon, Garp is instead being depicted to have had a rather one-track mind. The subject of his obsession being none other than Goldie Roger. And yes, this is a long-time rivalry that we have known about since forever, but it has been quite interesting to witness this throughout the flashback. I've said this before, but it has been very intriguing as to why Garp is so wholly fixated on Roger, especially in an era that was known as the Rox era. I mean, Roger was already formidable by this point for sure, but he certainly doesn't seem to have been the main player of those days. The number one threat for the Marines surely would have been Rox. After all, it was called the era of Rox. So for me, this obsession that Garp has for Roger certainly seems quite personal, although we don't know why that is yet. But what's even more is that this focus seems to trump over all of Garp's other priorities. As we saw in chapter 1096, when Garp is requested to lend a hand at God Valley, he initially refuses. He seems quite content to not get involved in what promises to be quite the showdown between the Rox pirates and the Celestial Dragons, who will surely be protected by the God's Knights and the rest of the Marines forces. It's only when Garp hears that Roger is also getting involved that he too is motivated to make a move. In fact, it's the first thing we see him exclaim as he arrives at God Valley: "Where is Roger?" And I think the way that we had always read these scenes is that this is Garp's own way of following and living by his own personal moral code. While he is a Marine, which as an institution is corrupt, we know Garp to be quite a righteous man. According to Sengoku, he has rejected the admiral position many times solely because it would mean that he has to directly follow the orders of the Celestial Dragons, whom he hates, and his hatred for the Celestial Dragons is one of the two reasons why Garp doesn't like to talk about the God Valley incident. Not only did he have to team up with Roger, he also had to protect the Celestial Dragons, a task that does not align with his personal moral compass, all of which was revealed to us in chapter 957. So by the time we saw Garp in chapter 1096, his decision to initially not get involved, but then only come after Roger, that did feel very much in line with what we already knew about Garp. So why is it then that since the God Valley incident flashback has been unveiling in front of us chapter by chapter, it's now that we feel that Garp's actions feel a little more uncertain, a little more questionable? Why do we feel that his actions now feel out of line with what we know of him as a character with a strong moral code? Well, I think that's because Garp, like many characters in One Piece, is not a good guy, but he's also not a bad guy. But that being said, we would still characterize him as being mostly good. I don't think it's at all controversial to say that Garp is one of the more righteous characters with much better morals, much better values and ethics than others in the series. But still, we do know that he's not perfect. Although he detests the Celestial Celestial Dragons. He's unable to completely break away from the confines of the Marines who are ultimately ruled by the Celestial Dragons and go completely rogue like his son Dragon, while he himself doesn't like talking about the God Valley incident, the incident that earned him the title of Naval Hero. He still doesn't correct the world's misunderstandings about how he had to work with a notorious pirate, or how he actually considers it shameful that he protected the Celestial Dragons. And if we remember back to the Marineford War, how can we forget that Garp acted in very similar ways, faced with the very strong moral dilemma of where his loyalty lies, whether it's to his family or to the Marines. In the end, I would say that he actually pretty much failed at living up to either one whilst trying to toe the line. It was one of the most realistic, painfully realistic portrayals of how vulnerable and how weak we can be as humans. And I think this does somewhat line up with what we're seeing at God Valley. Garp knows that he can't stop the native hunting competition as just one man. I mean, think about it. He goes there, openly kills the Celestial Dragons, openly opposes the God's Knights. Chances are he gets himself killed. And while it may be very honorable, very noble to go out like a martyr, it's not always the most effective. Garp probably did the calculations in his head. Yes, I detest what the Celestial Dragons are doing, but better that I live on to help out other innocent civilians throughout the world and do what I can do to continue doing good as a Marine in the world rather than die in a lost cause. But I think what gets a little harder to understand is then why he changes his mind when Roger gets involved, and even more still, once he's arrived at God Valley and surrounded by the atrocities, why he's still fixated on Roger. I mean, yes, we do see him go after the other Rocks pirates as well, but clearly his focus is still on Roger. Which is why I keep saying that there must be some deep-rooted personal connection, personal relationship between Roger and Garp. Actually, now that I think about it, can you imagine if Roger and Garp knew each other from their childhood days? After all, they are both from the East Blue, and we actually don't know all that much about their childhood, which Oda might be keeping deliberately on the down low, keeping it hush-hush for the time being, and he's going to reveal this massive character relationship to us in the future. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one who thinks that the Monkey D family and Gold D family don't look too dissimilar either. Personality-wise, they're also pretty similar. Would it be that crazy if they were like distant relatives, distant cousins? I know a popular fan theory is that Dragon and Sakazuki have a best friends turned enemies backstory, one that I have also discussed many moons ago. But imagine if Garp and Roger also have that same relationship. All those scenes we've seen of Garp so disappointed that both his grandsons turned to piracy instead of becoming upstanding Marines, or how his son has left the Marines to start the Revolutionary Army. Imagine if his first failure, or what Garp considers his first failure, is losing Roger, his best friend, to piracy. Anyways, that's a whole nother discussion that I definitely think we should have at another time. Where was I going with this? Oh, Garp's questionable actions at God Valley. Okay, so I think a lot of fans are disappointed that Garp is still focused on Roger and even his antagonism towards the Rocks pirates instead of his fists being directed towards the Celestial Dragons. I think I mentioned this during the reaction stream, but a quote that really comes to mind as I witnessed this is from Batman Begins. It's not who you are, but what you do that defines you. Meaning that no matter how innately good and upstanding Garp may be, and we may know him to be internally, if he stands by to implicitly condone the actions of the Celestial Dragons, then how good is he? And for me, I do personally think that this portrayal of Garp is really powerful and also really confronting, a really confronting reminder about how the human conscience can be. Once we justify something in our own heads, you can really start to lose perspective. Garp may have started out understandably choosing to abstain from God Valley altogether, but now that he's here, I do think the more righteous thing to be doing is find some way to help the civilians, but it seems like, at least for now, that Garp may be doing the mental gymnastics in his head, justifying to himself why it's right for him to be going after pirates and ignore what's happening. But it's hard to justify that, right? Especially in a series where we've seen people do the right thing. We're seeing that via Dragon during this flashback. We've also seen it via Fujitora, who found a way during the revolutionaries' attack on Marijoa, even helping the revolutionaries for the sake of freeing the slaves, going directly against his duty as a Marine admiral. And I think that may be what we're expecting from Garp at God Valley. safety. I think we were expecting that once he actually got to the island, he may have found some way to slyly help the civilians escape rather than focusing on the pirates. Do a little more of what Dragon is doing. And look, I do want to say that it is not too late. God Valley flashback is not over yet, and I don't think we should be too quick to judge. Especially after chapter 1161, where we see Dragon recognize his father, there is a possibility, even perhaps a big possibility, that Garp helps Dragon escape with Shanks to take baby Shanks to safety. After all, Dragon is going to need all the help that he can get, and if Garp ends up being a big reason how Shanks eventually ended up on Roger's ship, and Roger is aware of that fact, it may be how Roger knows with certainty that Garp can be trusted with his own son. A son should not bear the sins of his father. Words that would hit way different upon reread if we found out that Garp is actually the one who said those words to Roger first. But I've also had another thought. If by the end of the God Valley incident, we don't see Garp acting differently, acting what we think is the righteous thing to do, what if that's to seed some future development? What if his failings, his shortcomings at God Valley is what prompts Garp to start Sword? And before we delve deeper into this idea, I just want to quickly mention, if you've enjoyed the discussion so far, then please subscribe to the channel to join the JoyFleet. We're just a bunch of One Piece fans, One Piece nerds who love to discuss our favorite series, and we're always looking to gain new nakama. Plus, in doing so, you would be helping me get to 100,000 subscribers. We are so close, and it is officially September, which means that you are morally obligated to join. Okay, getting back on track. The fact that we see Oda make a point of Dragon and Garp share a panel here at God Valley, for me that feels like that's going to be relevant, very relevant for some future development. And I do think that it's going to play a role in redeeming Garp somewhat. Whether that be Garp helping Dragon escape with Shanks like I mentioned before, even though it means that his son is going against the Marines, or it ends up being relevant in an argument between father and son later on. Maybe post God Valley, when Dragon is telling Garp that he is leaving the Marines, they get into a big row. I witnessed you care more about the pirates than about the innocent people dying, Dad. How could you? You raised me to have morals, to care about the weak and the defenseless. Why did you not live up to those same morals? Some sort of confrontation, I think, would be really powerful and could be exactly what Garp needs. I said earlier that it's easy for humans to get caught up in the justifications that we make up for ourselves. You know, I'm no psychologist, but I think we don't like to feel guilt or admit our failings, especially when we feel like, or when we know that our actions didn't live up to the moral code that we like to think we live by. And I think if that's what's happened to Garp, if he's failed to live by his own moral code, self-justifying his own actions to alleviate that sense of discomfort, that guilt of knowing that he was wrong, a good wake-up call from his own son may be exactly what he needs. Once Dragon declares that he's leaving the Marines, this could spur Garp to take actions of his own. Because Garp was probably right in his initial assessment that as one man, he probably couldn't stop the native hunting competition from happening. But what if he was more than just one man? What if it was a whole faction within the Marines? What if a whole group of officers decided to not follow the orders of the Celestial Dragons and save the innocent civilians instead? Maybe this is when Garp realizes, with a whole group of well-meaning, strong-willed Marine officers who joined the Navy with honorable intentions of helping people, then that's when change can really happen. As Garp witnesses his son's actions to defect from the Marines, he'd be confronted that there are a lot of good people who initially joined the Marines because they thought it was the genuine right thing to do. But then now he's confronted with the questions of, well, how do I foster that? How do I make sure that they're able to live in line with their code, not getting disillusioned in the process, not getting corrupted, or not getting killed as martyrs? And the answer could very well be Sword. I think I should point out that it has not been confirmed in the series yet that Garp is even a member of Sword, but I think many fans already believe that he is, if he isn't also its founder. We've already talked about Garp's morals and his values, which largely lines up with the other members of Sword and what they do as an organization. In fact, two of its known members, Kobe and Helmeppo, are direct mentees of Garp, and we've seen Garp consider Kobe his protege, calling him the future of the Marines. So Garp, being a member of Sword, feels almost canon at this point. But even more so, the events of this God Valley flashback are really making me believe that GARP really could be its founder, and God Valley may very well be what prompted GARP to establish Sword. After witnessing all the horrors and confronted with his own failures at God Valley, GARP would have had to have done a lot of self-reflecting. And I think a really redeeming resolution could be to set up Sword, a faction via which he could still be affiliated with the Marines that's also not really a part of the Marines, so that these officers can still do good and have the freedom to act in the way that they see fit according to a situation. GARP clearly has a lot of pride and belief in the Navy as an institution despite all their faults, so he couldn't bring himself to leave the Navy outright and join his son in setting up the Revolutionary Army. And again, I would at some point love to explore why GARP does feel such deep loyalty to the Marines. Might be a backstory that could be even tied to the idea that I discussed earlier about Roger and GARP's backstories, their shared past, but in the meantime, it really does seem like God Valley may have been the perfect catalyst to GARP establishing a structured faction within the Marines as a way to ensure that he could do more good than bad and live and die proudly, knowing that he measured up to his moral code. And can I just say that this deep dive into morality, into horrible actions and the questions about morality and ethics and values, I don't know if it's just a coincidence, but personally I can't help but feel that Oda is making a commentary about our own world, about the things that we're seeing in our world today at a time and point in our world where there is a lot of atrocities taking place. But anyways, those are just some thoughts that I've been having on the whole GARP situation, but let me know what you think by leaving a comment below. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please like the video, share the video. Again, please do subscribe to help me get to 100,000 subscribers. I'd really appreciate it, and in return you'll get more and more One Piece discussions. You can also help support the channel further by becoming a Patreon or channel member like these wonderful people. But as always, thank you so much for listening to another one of my crazy One Piece ramblings. This is JoyGirl, and I'll see you again soon.